Welcome to Comp 3309 and your first lecture and first step into the actual course. And I said this course is more about technology and society and our personal views in relation to it, and amongst our peers how they view it, and how each reflects and kind of intertwines with each other. It's kind of the argument to make. And so to start stuff off, I thought it'd be best to go back to and think about, well, how do we start collecting information and knowledge and data, and how do we gain wisdom? And what does that mean in context for this course? Because just these topics themselves could be an entire philosophical course on themselves, and there's a lot of different worldviews. So at least I want to set a grounding for well, where do we start in this course? So like I said, this course is called Information Technology and Society. What does that mean? What does technology mean? What does the term information technology actually mean? And how do we define what is actual society? And that's what I'm hoping over these first few lectures that we'll delve into and get some experience while we're actually going through the readings and having our class discussions. So technology itself, it's not something that just exists in a vacuum on its own, not separate, independent, and not connected to anything else. It may have been, you may initially think of it that way. I would make an argument that it's not, that you don't just have a device in front of you that's not separated to anything else. There's a lot more that comes to that technology that you have, and even what technology is beyond just viewing it as just this physical electronic device. So technology doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It exists inside a complicated system that involves the history behind it, of the people and development and products and everything, the laws that are around it, the economics, the organizational policies and the procedures, normative perspectives on it, ideologies around it, political views. All of this has been impacted. Especially things like laws. That device that you may have, technology that we're using, could be impacted due to changes in laws and also between different borders. What about the normative perspectives, being what are the views that are generally held within a certain society or community about that actual technology? What has it affected? Ideologies around things of what does technology do? Is it driven that technology changes society, or does society change technology, or do we co-evolve together and change as needs and things shift in this complex web? And so it's that first step, I'd say, is, well, we can't just see it as this independent thing. And we need to question even what do we view as being technology? What is our personal view versus what are other views when you're exposed to them, and how could that change things? So this complicated system that I'm talking about is usually referred to as, we could say, the term society. That if we're saying what is a society, there's more beyond this, but this interconnected, complex web of interrelations between entities and forces and laws and ideologies and all of that, then could be called as society. At least as far as I'm trying to give a definition to it in this course. Now, technology isn't just out there, as I was saying, in society. It also is intimately intertwined with us, with the self, with our inner world, and our conscious and unconscious behaviors. And so this can be referred to basically as our psychology. Of well, how do we react, and what do we do, and how does it affect us? Is this something along the lines of how technology, social media itself, is affecting people, that it can be a positive connection between the sharing information, or is it a negative exchange between all of this and intertwined with us? How do we expect things to be done? Right now, with this video it itself, is even having access to electromaterial this way and being able to create it with the fact of having an internet and other things. And what does that change then for what means education and your unconscious choices that then you make about doing stuff? One example being, back in the day for this course, sometimes we'd actually make people physically handwrite their assignments and hand it into a box, and how that changed people's perspectives of what they would do for assignments. When you knew that, oh no, I physically have to travel to a location, and then I have to actually hand it in that time, and I need to take this into account, versus the unconscious, just kind of grown-up behavior that we know, oh, it's electronic, there's other ways I can do this, and distance doesn't have to be that physical factor, that I can submit this in other ways. And then how does that change our perspectives, how we interact the world, and what we expect actually from it? So, aside from this is that like part of our psychology ourselves as humans is the fact of, well, what role has technology played within that psychology of either changing it or us changing technology around our own psychology? So technology and society. So one of the themes of this course is that technology eventually has societal and psychological consequences. It is important that we keep our analytical focus on both of these, of what is technology, what is the psychological consequences around it. And this is being both positive and negative. This doesn't mean consequences being negative consequences. This could be positive things and roles it played, but there's also negative or whatever spectrum you want to take along this, but we have to take that into account of these two interrelations between the two of them. So we have to think about the themes of the course of that, the technology and society being interrelated within a complex web, and the fact that there are psychological consequences to what actually happens and how we choose things. That we are not sitting in a void separately when we make a program or work with an actual computer and send something out into the void of the internet. Is there's other people there. There's other things that this could actually affect. And so taking into more of account a wider range of reasons of what could be going on. Now, for this course, I want you to adopt, or like at least encourage you to adopt two different perspectives. Because generally you have your own perspective of what you think and how you're viewing the world, and it can be difficult to see others. And when you're coming into like this course, a lot of you I know are like computer science or business BCIS students, so Bachelor of Computer Information Systems, or you're like sciences or criminal justice studies or policy studies or different areas from there. And so already in this classroom itself, like we have a different range of perspectives from even just the fields that we're in and what we're experienced too and our general communities we're part of. But then we all have our own personal communities outside of school in the field of what we study that comes in. So these all blend together, you could say, to make our perspective of what we're looking at. So when you're coming to this course, what I would like you to try to adopt is like a perspective of being an immigrant to a new land where new customs are there, and a detective where you may not just blindly question everything you'll see, but you want to look for the good and bad and have questions about, well, what's really going on, instead of just accepting, oh, society, technology, that's it. Well, like, well, how do different people view society? What are different people's views of what is technology and what technology does and how does it connect with us? It's kind of like why I want to have discussions in this course, is that getting into, well, it's not just hearing me talk as the teacher, but it'd be nice to hear what students and other people think within this actual course itself. So from an immigrant perspective, you want to think of this as being people who have to consciously learn, say, political, linguistic, or media systems instead of growing up within it and then reflecting back. Like, instead of just saying, like, well, this is just how I've grown up and I've experienced, and becomes ingrained into who you are, once you go to a completely new culture and land, well, what does it take then to understand the differences between the actual two and have an open mind to learn these different processes and then reflect based upon your own perspectives? And so just like immigrants, you must approach your technological environment with a distance of people who can draw comparisons with an earlier time and way of being, something before yourself and what you experienced. And we will try to achieve this mindset through different experiential activities, but this is more through the thought and discussions and through the reading. So one form of technology that we're using to exchange ideas and hopefully give some kind of idea of perspectives. Now, from a detective perspective, is that you must be willing to ask skeptical questions and suspicious questions about our technology and be willing to contemplate the possibility that crimes are being committed. So sometimes there's the like progressive kind of view of technology that everything that's new, every new version will always be better. And that's the best way to adopt. And adopting new technology, the ever-progressing increase and change will make something better. And it could, but being detectives, you should think, well, be skeptical. I'm like, well, what if it's causing other issues? What else could be going on? What is a wide range of perspectives that I could actually like investigate and talk to and then come to something a little bit larger than what I know, and combining these facts and knowledge together? So again, throughout the rest of the course, try to take those two things. Try to be open to your mind about when you think of technology, you have your views, but be aware it could be more than what you think. You may have positive experiences with something, but someone else may have negative experiences with that exact same thing. And well, what does that actually mean when we talk about that and take this into account? And having that open view about what we're coming into for this course. So what is technology? We'll be going more over this in a future lecture as well to give you a different perspective that may be biased from my side, but it's at least it's present you with one starting perspective, is that technology is not just a thing. It's not just a physical object or tool that you are using, like your phone, your computer, your laptop, itself like that. It's also a system that involves economics, education, ideas, marketing, science, financing, like everything around that technology and what people do, of that new industries that have come out of it. Like the newer world of anything from even making money on YouTube and social media and being influencers, compared to like, well, we didn't have that before, and what does that mean now? The new cryptocurrencies, and what does that completely mean now for society? What does it mean that something may be good, but maybe it's the marketing sold it more to people, the packaging and stuff like that. Like there's more to what you're just seeing, and it's not just always that simple tool. It's also that interconnection between everything and those tools that are then like can be viewed as technology. Technology is also a way of thinking, a way of looking at the world that sees the world as something that can be manipulated. That through this tool and this idea is that I can exchange information, gather information, change and solve something that I couldn't do before, that I couldn't do independently just on my own or as I'm interacting with other people. And I'd also add to this that technology is not, again, just a physical electronic device. That I know a lot of the students coming here, their computer science and BCIS background on the people, is that when you hear technology, just instantly, okay, computers, digital phone, and tools like that. But it can be considered more that anything we use to manipulate and understand the world around us could be considered some form of technology. So language and writing, that there's different ways to communicate. Like we need to communicate in some way. And there's different ways of doing that, through like verbal sound to physical communication to written and other formats. And those are forms of technology that are developed over time of like, well, how do we go about communicating this into all different levels from right here. So again, it's not just that phone, it's also the language that we use at all just to communicate between other could be viewed as a form of technology. And how does that shift and change over time, and how does that connect within society itself? So before we go further, we need to talk about ways of knowing and give it some context in relation to this course. So what I mean ways of knowing is like, if we're talking about technology and society and psychology and what we know about it that builds up our perspective, we need to understand, well, when we say ways of knowing, how do people know what they know? Like, how do you learn on that? Now, if you're coming up to the reading, you should have along with these notes, and later on we'll get into a term called epistemology, which is the study of the ways of knowing or knowledge. So how do people learn? How do we know what we actually know? When people say the term common sense, what does that actually mean from one society and one group to another? Because what's common sense to me may not be common sense to someone else, but it is within their circle of influence and the community that they're actually part of, that they may not be aware of, but they may be influenced by. And so we need to talk about, well, give some kind of context to, well, how do people know things? Because if we're going to say, like, what's going to be technology to manipulate the world around us, probably should first understand, well, how do we get to know stuff around us, to know that we even need to have, say, the wisdom or knowledge to change and build a technology or use it to accomplish this. And then the fact that we know that our technology then also can be used then to do some of this work of collecting the data, formatting into information, building knowledge from that, and gaining wisdom that when we combine with the actual two. So we need to have a little discussion. And again, this can be entire fields and entire courses all about talking about the ways of knowing and how people view that. Especially, say, from a positivist science perspective to some other fields of study or ways of knowing that there's a lot of different theories, and there's stronger ones that have been tested from there that help us go forwards to understand and predict and build new things, but we still need to talk about it. And so this is why like these notes really are going into being are labeled data, information, knowledge, and wisdom, is trying to do what I do as a computer science when I deal with abstract things, is that I give it some kind of concrete meaning or model around it and break it down into terms and connect them together in some kind of logical way. And that's just the way that I like to do it, more from my side background being computer science, science kind of side, and what makes sense to me. Now, there are, as I said here, like many different theories in relation to ways of knowing beyond what will be presented in this course. So I'm not saying this is the end-all, be-all, this is the way it is. I'm just giving one first starting perspective of this, which then allows us to talk about and have a basis within the actual course. And so we'll focus on ways of knowing that are more in relation to technology and society. And so this is what I'm saying, that starting with that data, information, knowledge, and wisdom, because everything really about computers in the beginning of at least electronic technology is that dealing with that processing of that data, gathering information from it, maybe communicating that, building knowledge, and the wisdom from built off of that. So again, that's why we're talking about these four things and giving some basic definition of this. Now, to do this for this course, as I said again, like I'm a computer scientist, and when I deal with complex things, I realize I like to make abstractions from it so that I can take that complexity, give some common terminology to be able to talk about it, and then break it down into subcomponents. Like basically breaking it down, this is the house, these are all the rooms that are within it, and each room contains certain things, and this is the path that connects everything together so that you can follow through that, following that kind of logical reasoning, at least in my head, that sequential steps from point A to point B, and how did I actually get there, and that you should be able to retrace those kind of same steps. And to do this, I'm just pulling out one model that I didn't make. This is coming from other people, but it's called the DIKW pyramid. From right here, connecting stuff together, and you'll see in a second it has a breakdown, has a whole chart to kind of understand it, like a blueprint. And it's called the DIKY model or pyramid because it stands for data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. So model representing the structural or functional relationship between what is data, information, knowledge, and actual wisdom itself. And pulling up more of a pyramid image from, kind of like filtering, that you're going from the lot of data at the bottom to getting information and knowledge to wisdom that comes out of that, and that filtering of all the data to get to where we actually are from the peak at the top being the wisdom that we've grown that's built upon the information and knowledge and data that then comes before that. And so in this model, typically information is defined in terms of data, knowledge is defined in terms of information, and wisdom in terms of knowledge. And so it's more of this interconnection that you expect, the bottom layer being data, and then you're defining from what data is, how does that then become what is called information, and then from information, knowledge, and then knowledge is wisdom. And so here's one kind of your diagram, if you're going to go for the abstraction and like symbology I was using earlier, being, well, this is the image of the house we're working with, the DIKY model. Is like, this is one way of viewing where we start doing stuff if we're interacting with the world around us, starting at the bottom being the signals and information that we have coming into us. So if it's us personally, if we're viewing this model being the actual sensory information or whatever way that we have of data. And this is just idea of being signals, knowing data, like no context but being numbers. And then giving that context, it becomes information. Then based upon information, if we have meaning combined with data and context, well, then we're gaining knowledge from it. And then giving insights when we look at that knowledge that give you new things about predicting from the actual future potentially, then we get wisdom. And this model they built here is that if we're talking about wisdom, that's based upon the knowledge we've gotten, and that knowledge is based upon the information that we've gathered, and then information is based upon the data with the context that we've actually given to it. And so you can kind of view it one way if we look at this model talking about society around us, is as we're doing this, like we're gathering data And then we're putting it into a context that we understand, giving it meaning, building knowledge off of that, and learning off of patterns to get up to actually wisdom. And so that wisdom and knowledge that we have is based upon the information we have coming before this that we have actually gathered. And then over time, this new model could be developing in your head of your understanding of the new data and knowledge and wisdom that continuously keeps growing of how you connect and understand stuff and what you've experienced. And the same thing for technology itself. This is like, how does it go through this process? And if we go back to a detective thing here, this doesn't always mean that we're making the right choices when we're going to wisdom, is that when you have data, and if we think of it without any context, data doesn't always mean that it's good. This could be incorrect data. So incorrect assumptions we have about something, and then we put into a context, and that's how we build up our wisdom. And so that wisdom could be faulty. And so when we get new data, we should be re-questioning the wisdom and experiences that we actually have. So what sources you have coming from in here. So if we're not exposed to other perspectives or don't know about it, and the choices we make now for what we see as being common sense could be completely changed by a new perspective that we've never seen before. So building up from there. Giving an application for this, at least a context kind of thing. If we're going for data and numbers, data could be just some kind of measurement of something you've seen. You have 3. I've got 3 of something. So no context, that means nothing. So 3, you've got nothing here. But give it a context, well, then we've got information that we can pull from there. So that, okay, well, what if we had said that in the context was that we are a social influencer trying to make the most connections, and we have only 3 followers on our social media account. And you're like, well, that's a context. So you have information from there. There's more of knowledge and wisdom we can start pulling out from there, but that's that context. Versus, well, what if this was like 3 of something, but what if this is late night, we're downtown somewhere in an alley lost, and there's 3 people following us. So again, so we have 2 information from there, 2 different contexts, which changes the actual information from here, which we haven't drawn knowledge yet because we haven't given it any meaning from here. So say if we go back to the analogy of it being social influencer and followers, 3 followers. Other information we know is to be a good social influencer, you want to have a larger number of followers, more connections, be able to connect with people. 3 is a small number. So giving that meaning, the knowledge we know is we are not doing good. We are not being a good social influencer, and the insights that we can go from there is that we probably have to go back and work better at connecting with more people. Or if this is the case of like 3 people in an alley and we're alone and we're lost, we don't know. Maybe our past experience, this could be negative. Maybe this is unsure, unsafe, and we're trapped. And so maybe we should give some meaning to that we're in danger. Or, hey, maybe there's 3 people that are trying to help us, and most people around this neighborhood and this city that we know have been very helpful. So maybe they'll help me, and I can ask them for help for us. So depends upon other information that you actually have and providing meaning to that, getting to knowledge and wisdom. So either we ask them for help, or we run like crazy, or we go all John Wick and think we can fight our way and save it, which I know I couldn't. And so I don't know what I would do. So that's just a quick analogy. So going back and going through these layers again and giving more definitions to it, is that data itself is discrete, objective facts or observations which are unorganized and unprocessed and therefore have no meaning or value because of a lack of context and interpretation. And so these are collected and observed qualitative and quantitative variables and values. So quantitative being like, numbers like the 3, qualitative being the smells, experiences, other things like that. But the idea is that this is why this is the bottom of the pyramid, that you have data that you could have lots. There's no connections and organization, anything from here. It's just raw, basic data that you have. Kind of like the image I chose for this slide is that, well, you have nothing from here. If this is all paper, and we know like, well, if we have individual sheets of paper, there is some color between it from right here, and that's the qualitative thing, but it's unorganized at this first step. But when we talk about the relationships between it, means we're putting some kind of context onto that data, well, then that's what information is. So again, data put into context to have meaning becomes useful information or a description of what, allowing us to interpret things. So this is taking this kind of raw data, filtering it some, why we go up to the pyramid and it shrinks on the side some, and that we're organizing and making connections between stuff and putting into a context. So we can say like, okay, these sheets of paper, they're here, they're color, but they're organized by color, and the context is they represent temperature. So we know that the top, so reds are higher temperatures, yellows could be mid temperatures, white are colder temperatures, and it could be that they're organized by, the time of day. And so then we start having information context that we can pull from here, knowing temperatures of like, oh, if this was one day, there was some cold, there was a lot of it that was actually hot based on this. And so if we have that context that's put upon it. So information, organized or structured data which has been processed in such a way that the information now has relevance for a specific purpose or context, and is therefore meaningful, valuable, useful, and relevant. So example here, like this image, if this is just like the binary ones and zeros, those are no context at all. But if this is, this is, say, for the computer science and BCIS students in the course of experience or others, if they say this represents ASCII stored in a machine, well, then we know that means characters. But there's other cases, like I have a whole bunch of data that I've collected, and it's just like these last sheet here, is that if this is, again, the context organized that these are sorted by time of day. So let's say each piece of paper is every 5 minutes the temperature was taken. And so we go from the bottom left corner is the actual start of the day, and the top right is the end of the actual day. We can see the day started cold, got warmer, and got even warmer, and the majority of the day was warmer. We have some kind of context from it. But that's where we've taken the data, which is these measurements time, organized and put a context onto it, and now we can start using it. And so if we start getting meaning applied to this, then we can start developing knowledge out of that. Like the fact that I said that, hey, it was warmer this day, and then start comparing that. So information is contained in descriptions and is differentiated from data in that it is useful. Information is inferred from data in the process of answering integrative questions of who, what, where, how many, when, why, and so giving some kind of context to it overall and how you organize that. And information giving meaning with some kind of understanding becomes contextualized as the idea of knowledge, or a description of how to, so allowing us to model things. So once we have some context from right there, we put some understanding on it that we get based on everything else we've learned, and out of that we're getting new knowledge of what we've learned combined from it. So knowledge is defined in this course at least as with reference to information having been processed. So we're going from that data again up to information that's been processed, organized, questioned in some way, or structured in some way, and is being applied or put into actual action. So once we have this, then we're taking that in insight to say, well, what do we do for this? And we're like, okay, well, what if it, again, go back to this original analogy of the temperature, what if I did this for every day for an entire year, and I can start maybe learning and predicting patterns of what comes out of this for temperature and start using that and building new knowledge of how to react from it, so knowledge of how to understand. So knowledge has also been described as the synthesis or multiple sources of information over time and the organization and processing to convey understanding. So it means like, well, we have these data input sources that we're getting coming into us and viewing this, and then we're applying that as information to give it some kind of organizational structure, and then from there I'm applying some kind of understanding to that information and organizing this and adding it into what we know over time is new knowledge, so new experiences that we've learned, like don't stick the fork in the light socket because you'll get hurt, don't touch fire because it burns, I don't want to actually do that, but use fire to cook things because it helps us this way, whatever way. Use these words because it works better in this context for this actual language and environment because there's more cultural meaning behind it, and I didn't know that before versus I do know that actually now. And so that understanding becomes that new knowledge. And again, coming at this from that detective perspective is just because we have knowledge doesn't mean that it's positive and always right. It's just what we know based upon our actual experiences and perspectives. And it would be nice if we could like shift or see the other side that this view could be different from a different standpoint. So when we further add explanation or why to knowledge, we gain understanding. And knowledge and understanding given insight or judgment becomes actionable as wisdom, or a description of what is best, enabling us to make better decisions of what to do. So our wisdom over time. And so wisdom is the ability to increase the effectiveness and do the right thing, whatever the right is. That's an open term. And even being our detective kind of hats on, or perspective that we're taking, is that we have this wisdom. Doesn't always mean that it's correct. It's just what I have. Our perspectives over time. And I could be completely wrong, but it's what I'm going forwards with what I know now. That's why we come back to this model. So I said there's lots of different ways of knowing and pulling stuff in and integrating stuff, and we have our psychology as humans. I just wanted to give one model that has that kind of logical flow as a basis point for us to talk about it. This idea of our data coming in, processing that information to knowledge, wisdom, and our decisions from this. And you have to think within this model, you think, well, where are those sources coming from? Like if we have perspectives that are on technology, well, then that's been informed by the data and information the data that we've collected, the context that we've put it on for information, that knowledge coming up. And so our views of technology have been affected by it. Our views of it could be affected by other people. Our views could also be affected by actually that technology itself. The way we learn could just be affected by the fact that we have that technology even as a passive source, and that wisdom and point of what we come to today, because what we think today may not be what we see later on. But this model of perspective within society that we're viewing of how we're collecting and how we're being influenced, how do we come to what we know and understand, and then how do we relate to society and how are we affected by society. And with this kind of DIKW model, it's more of that sensory input becomes that important part of it, at least from my perspective, and then the applying to the context. So if we can think then, well, how does that affect when people's views of what they're seeing that technology has such a big impact versus not? What about generational things for technology, especially for me to people in this course, is like at the time of recording this, I'm 40. And so my perspectives on technology and education is different than potentially some of the people that are in this class. Like the fact that when I started elementary school, the internet wasn't a thing that was accessible at home or even that you had. Just having computers at the school to do stuff was new and wasn't common. It wasn't really until closer to late high school to early university that even having internet home, let alone even on campus at school, what does that mean and what was on there and how has that shifted over time. And so my perspectives of knowledge and wisdom have been maybe affected in different ways versus others where you've had access in the beginning. So, and I'm not saying good or bad, it's just that there could be different perspectives because this kind of model of what we've built up for wisdom could be different over time. So another way to visualize just the pyramid, if we get kind of like a flow chart kind of way of seeing this, is that idea of viewing that data coming in over whatever lines and all these sources, being filtered and structured into information and then given some kind of explanation or context or whatever, understanding, getting into being knowledge and applying that to understanding and then building wisdom out of that. So kind of that some of this is coming from the past, then wisdom to try to actionable to use it for the future and how we interact and understanding this. So weird way to think about it, but just one way if you're coming from like the immigrant perspective and the detective one is just like kind of take, well, what does this mean? If we've been informed this way, then maybe other people have been informed in different ways. And so if I get exposure to that, maybe I can start changing my wisdom some or questioning it some and take that into account. When I am working with technology, be more aware of like, well, what is it doing to me and what am I doing to it? If I am just a programmer, I realize that you're not just a programmer. You are someone who's part of society. You're not just someone who works for a company. You are part of society and not separated from that. And separating that is, in my opinion, ignoring some links to where you could have benefits or you could be causing harms and things that you need to take into account and people's priorities from that. So it's my side. You can take whatever you would like. So I said earlier that this can be referred to as the term epistemology, the ways of knowing. So like epistemology is a philosophical study of the nature and origin and limits of human knowledge. So how do we know what we know? Like that's what it's called. So if you want to search this out more, you can search the term epistemology in different fields. What does this actually mean? And it's an important starting point from here is to realize, okay, well, how do we know what we know? And if we follow the DIKW model, then how does that affect what we know if it's going through that process? Or is there different ways or models that knowledge comes in, or how is it actually processed? And we need to take into account that there are going to be different epistemologies in relation to technology and society. And those may be explicitly there or implicitly, but they do affect people's views. Because say if you view that technology is the driving force to change society, then your choices to make changes in the world and what you use may be different from someone who doesn't see that, versus maybe there's an interconnection from it. And so this is, again, epistemology is the theory of knowledge and how people think. And there's a whole range of fields and ideas out there for this. So going for a few quotes and ideas, that like, epistemology is the study of knowledge. But by what conduit do we know what we know? Just having that question. It's a weird thing. How do we know what we know? How do we know what is common sense for one culture versus another, for one group versus another? What's common sense for me as a teacher and my experience as a student versus what's common sense for you as a student and a learner and maybe potentially a teacher of other people at this time and age with your experiences? So that's what epistemology is. But also adding, I'd want you to think that, just like this quote gives, is that, but epistemology is always inevitably personal. The point of the probe is always in the heart of the explorer. What is my answer to the question of the nature of knowing? Now, different people have different views, that there may be the hard line, one view of like, no, this is how we know. This has been so researched. This is how we know what we know. But you've probably hit other people that you're like, I don't understand how they think that way. And maybe the first perspective you could think is, well, they do think that way. They've had their experiences. They have learned. So they have their own way of actually knowing. And maybe what you're hitting is that when you're presented with the same data and it's integrated into your way of knowing, it doesn't integrate in the same way. So you can't come to the same end conclusions of wisdom and knowledge that they've come from it. But it doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just they've come from that different side. So maybe if both sides have a shift, what could that actually mean? And so when you're looking at stuff for the courses, you should be like questioning what is your own personal experience with it and reflecting on it first. You should be talking with others to gain that experience. I mean, others not just in your close cohort, but try to step out from that. And then also trying to see from other cultural and other backgrounds of like views of economical, marketing, worldview, all this kind of complex connections between society that you have of how does this all connect together? And maybe from there that you'll develop new ways of actually knowing, new perspectives that change your wisdom and how you interact with the world. And just questioning and shaking it some. Maybe you won't. It's perfectly fine. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm just kind of poking a little bit and thinking like, hey, could we both maybe think differently for a bit based upon how we perceive stuff and take a step back out of our groups, out of our lived experience, and combine it with someone else and see, well, how does this shift? How does this change? So epistemology in this course. So we need to be aware that there are different ways of knowing that each of us has. And it has an impact on how we look at technology and society. So how we view, how we choose to use it, how we see it as a benefit or a hindrance, how it changes us either explicitly or implicitly, and being aware of that and identifying then that views of what people see. And where is your place within this kind of like spectrum? Or if it is a spectrum, whatever it is, versus how do you relate to others and how could you shift over time and change. So for this week, I want you just to do this one reading that's here. So epistemology, how do we know what we know? It's an online one. It's a short 6-minute like reading, which if you stay here in a second, I'm actually going to use like a text to speech and you can actually read/listen to it as you go. But I want you to reflect on what we just talked about earlier on in these notes. And so, well, how does this article relate to the idea of the DIKW kind of pyramid? How does this relate to the idea of what I've said society and technology actually could be? How does this then relate to how you view it yourself? So as you're going through the article, what do you see about this? What seems good or bad? What rings true to you? What seems confusing and doesn't make sense? What are things that you just would be like, I just don't care. I don't even like that, which is then ingrained by you found what you like, and that shifting may not need to be there if you don't want it. So again, think of the article in relation to the DIKW pyramid. What are our own senses and experiences in relation to epistemology? So your feelings. What are other people's senses and experiences into this? So maybe talk to other people you know if you want. about this, or what have you experienced? And you can think about that seemed kind of like, oh, I connected with what that person said versus I disconnected with what someone else says. Do we all think the same? So even when I say this in these models, do we all think the same, or is there different ways of knowing and how we gather that information? Is it the world around us? Is it senses that affect us, or is it not at all? Is it the experiences we have, or is there something else that's going on? And as a society, how does this combine all together? So right now, as I said, since this is the online video, what I want to do this first time is that, like, I think it's a good process just to sit down, physically go off the computer and read the actual article. So some of you may like to print off the actual article and make annotates, so highlight it, you make notes or draw pictures around it to make sense of it and kind of synthesize the information. Others may read it online. And if you find that, like, you're having difficulty being motivated to go through doing the readings, like I've had that sometimes when I have a lot of reading to get through, I found sometimes it's just nice that having someone read it to me. Maybe that makes me like I don't know, it just works to me. So that text to speech, especially nowadays, is becoming better. So an example of technology that, how does that affect us? And an ability that maybe there's other people that the physical ability to work with the physical medium, read a long period of time. Maybe you've had accidents, car accidents, other stuff that make it difficult to stare at screens, so listening is easier than actually reading, or you're impaired, or impaired being the right term, so whatever that is, it's something that makes a disconnect. Either way, I'm talking too much about it. So I just want to do right now, and even to motivate you if you don't want to get through the reading, it's a short reading, but I'm going to use an online text-to-speech now to have it actually read it to you. So it actually highlights sections and goes word by word and then reads it out. And so you can just shortly sit back and go through the article. And so think about those questions, write some notes down. Remember that this is part of your first activity that you have work in relation to this article, so you can go through this once, then I suggest maybe listening to it again, and maybe even a third time, and then going back and answering, like looking at those questions and start answering stuff and getting that activity done earlier. For the in-person version of this class, I'm going to skip this for this step, but right now for you guys that are online with the video, you'll get that. What I'm using is just one tool that I found. There's a free version that's okay, and then you can get paid version a little bit more expensive, and there's other things you can use, but I would just use naturalreaders.com from right here as an online tool or desktop tool that can take PDFs and other things and read out, or you can install it as a plugin to web browsers to actually step through files and have it read out. So you can see it over here. I've just got the actual web page open here. I have got the Natural Reader plugin actually installed, and then it allows you then to set the speed. So if you want to listen to it faster, because sometimes I'll do that, I like to listen to it once faster and then go back to normal speed at this time. You can pick a different voice from right here. I'm just going to pick a default kind of British sounding voice because I think it sounds nice from right here, and step through it. So at this time, if you don't want to go read off yourself, you can stop. You don't need to go through this point in time. If you're about to leave, I just want to remind you that no matter what you think, I think you're a good person. And I like to take these steps back from this course, and I'm jumping back from here, is that taking care of yourself, I think, is a very important thing. And I may not know a lot of you now, or maybe I do and I've had past experience, but no matter what's actually happened, no matter what wisdom or knowledge I've gained, is I'm always going to have that overridden by the fact that I think you're awesome. And if you disagree with that, well, I'm the teacher, you're wrong, you are awesome. Okay, with that done, I'm going to go to this. I'm going to pause my mic and then just let this read out to it, so you can just sit back and enjoy. Or slowly fall asleep to the sound of an electronic computer voice.
In the effort to epistemology, how do you know that you know what you know? There is no definite way to confirm that we know anything at all. Only from our direct experience can we claim any knowledge about the world. The role of perception in knowledge. It is hard to imagine a world that exists outside of what we can perceive. In the effort to get through each day without crashing our cars or some other calamity, we make assumptions about the objects in our physical world. Their continuity, their behavior. Some of these assumptions are based on our own experience, some on the knowledge imparted by others of their experience, and some on inferences of logic. Experience, however, comes through the lens of perception. How things look, how they feel, how they sound. Our understanding of, and interaction with, the world comes through particular constructs of the human body, eyes, ears, fingers, etc. Most people intuitively understand the subjectivity of some of our perceptions. Colors look different to people who are colorblind. Our feeling of temperature is impacted by immediate contrast. People stepping outside the doors of an airport will have a different impression of the temperature if they have just come from Moose Jaw or Cancun. Even more substantial understandings come to us through the lens of our senses. We can see the shape of a tree, or we could close our eyes and infer the shape through touch, but in either case, or even combining the two, we are relying on our senses to impart an understanding of the physical world. The question of what objectively is something that has long been one of the subjects of philosophy. Philosophers from Descartes to Kant have tried to describe our existence in such a way as to arrive at understanding of the physical world in which things can be conclusively known. Descartes introduces the idea in his Meditations: surely whatever I had admitted until now as most true I received either from the senses or through the senses. However, I have noticed that the senses are sometimes deceptive, and it is a mark of prudence never to place our complete trust in those who have deceived us even once. Descartes famously employed systematic doubt, questioning all knowledge conveyed by his experience in the world until the only knowledge he couldn't doubt was the fact that he could doubt. Therefore I suppose that everything I see is false. I believe that none of what my deceitful memory represents ever existed. I have no sense whatever. Body, shape, extension, movement, and place are all chimeras. What then will be true? Thus, after everything has been most carefully weighed, it must finally be established that this pronouncement I exist is necessarily true every time I utter it or conceive it in my mind. Descartes, Meditations. Descartes confirmed we have a self. Unfortunately, this self could be the one we see in the mirror each morning or a brain in a vat. If the only thing we cannot doubt is that we can doubt, essentially that guarantees us having only the mechanism to doubt. No body. We could therefore be isolated brains, being manipulated by things unknown, our entire world a mirage. How then can we hope to claim knowledge about the physical world? For Locke, our understanding of the world comes from our experience of it. It is this experience that provides knowledge. He says, in his essay concerning human understanding, let us then suppose the mind to be, as we say, white paper, void of all characters, without any ideas. How comes it to be furnished? Whence comes it? By that vast store with the busy and boundless fancy of man has painted on it with an almost endless variety. Whence has it all the materials of reason and knowledge? To this I answer, in one word, from experience. In that all our knowledge is founded, and from that it ultimately derives itself. He wrote that there were two types of qualities, ones that existed innately in an object or series of objects, such as size, number, or motion, and those that are wholly dependent on our perception of them, such as color or smell. The particular bulk, number, figure, and motion of the parts of fire or snow are really in them, whether one's senses perceive them or no, and therefore they may be called real qualities, because they really exist in those bodies. But light, heat, whiteness, or coldness are not more really in them than sickness or pain is in manner. Locke, An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. Experience then, as long as we have an understanding of the limitations of our perception, will confer certain truths about the physical world we inhabit. For example, through experience we can claim knowledge of how many crows are perched on a telephone wire, but not how many of them have black as an intrinsic property of their feathers. Quite in opposition to this was George Berkeley, pronounced Barclay, for whom to be single quote was to be perceived. Berkeley wrote in a treatise concerning the principles of human knowledge. Besides all that endless variety of ideas or objects of knowledge, there is likewise something which knows or perceives them and exercises diverse operations, as willing, imagining, remembering, about them. This perceiving does not denote any one of my ideas, but a thing entirely distinct from them, wherein they exist or, which is the same thing, whereby they are perceived, for the existence of an idea consists in being perceived. Because our knowledge of the world comes from our perception of it, it is impossible to conclusively know the existence of anything independent of our perception. Berkeley wrote, hence, as it is impossible for me to see or feel anything without an actual sensation of that thing, so it is impossible for me to conceive in my thoughts any sensible thing or object distinct from the sensation or perception of it. This line of inquiry ultimately results in the entire physical world being called into question, as Berkeley observed. If we have any knowledge at all of external things, it must be by reason, inferring their existence from what is immediately perceived by sense. However, it is granted on all hands, and what happens in dreams, frenzies, and the like, puts it beyond dispute that it is possible we might be affected with all the ideas we have now, though no bodies existed without resembling them. If we could not know things outside of perception, and our perceptions are entirely unreliable, where does that leave us? It certainly isn't useful to imagine your existence as the sum total of your knowledge, or that our experiences are inherently mistrustful. What these philosophies can be useful for understanding, though, is that often what we consider knowledge is more of a general social agreement on a somewhat consistent comprehension of the things before us. For example, we appreciate that the color green can be perceived differently by various people. But we organize our language based on a general understanding of the color green without worrying about the particular experience of green that any individual may have. For David Hume, there definitely was a physical world, our perception of which was ultimately responsible for all of our ideas, no matter how complex or abstract. He wrote in an inquiry concerning human understanding, "When we analyze our thoughts or ideas, however compounded or sublime, we always find that they resolve themselves into such simple ideas as were copied from a precedent feeling or sentiment. Even those ideas, which, at first view, seem the most wide of its origin, are found, upon a nearer scrutiny, to be derived from it. Furthermore, since all of our perceptions of the physical world are coming from the same physical world, and the nature of perceiving works more or less the same in each person, we can achieve a consistency in our understanding. So although it may not be possible to know things with the same certainty as knowing oneself, or to be able to really describe the construct of the world outside of our perception of it, at least we can get along with each other, because of the general consistency of experience. However, this experience still admits to a certain fragility. There is no guarantee that past experiences will be consistent with future ones. In an inquiry concerning human understanding, Hume observes, "Being determined by custom to transfer the past to the future, in all our inferences, where the past has been entirely regular and uniform, we expect the event with the greatest assurance and leave no room for any contrary supposition. But where different effects have been found to follow from causes, which are to appearance exactly similar, all these various effects must occur to the mind in transferring the past to the future, and enter into our consideration, when we determine the probability of the event. To simultaneously understand all effects when considering an event in the future is not necessarily a limitation, thanks to our amazingly sophisticated brains." Immanuel Kant thought that the way we process the information provided by our senses was an important component of knowledge. Kant wrote in the Prolegomena to any future metaphysics, "The difference between truth and dreaming is not ascertained by the nature of the representations which are referred to objects, for they are the same in both cases, but by their connection according to those rules which determine the coherence of the representation in the concept of an object, and by ascertaining whether they can subsist together in experience or not." Kant did not support the view that the existence of objects was called into question because of the subjectivity of the perceptions by which we must experience them, but neither that all knowledge of the physical world comes from experience. Kant argued, "Experience teaches us what exists and how it exists, but never that it must necessarily exist so and not otherwise. Experience therefore can never teach us the nature of things in themselves." Knowledge, then, is made up of things we infer, things we experience, and the way our brain processes both. The great metaphysical question of why it is all this way may always be out of our reach. Understanding some of this metaphysical uncertainty in knowledge does not mean that we have to give up on knowing anything. It simply points to a certain subjectivity, an allowance for different conceptions of the world. And hopefully it offers a set of tools with which to evaluate or build claims of knowledge. Next post, the self-education.
Okay, so I'll leave you guys off there. I suggest maybe going back to this article and reading through it once more, and make sure that you think about those guiding questions to get preparation for the class discussion, and then also start working on that first activity. Other than that, I hope you will have a great day and that you've maybe enjoyed this lecture some. I know I do.